Okay, so we're here. I got a friend here. I'm going to introduce him in a second. This is episode 1 with a guest. And we got here because I went to the Final Cut Grill Twitter and I said, okay, you guys are the producers. Who do you want to be the first guest? And at a margin of 2-1, that sounds really fancy. It's just 2 people versus 1. You guys picked my friend Alex Gollner. Alex, in his requisite red shirt, welcome to the grill.
Hello, great to see you. It's fantastic. And even got a red drink to go with it.
Awesome. So Alex and Sam Messman have been, if you didn't know, this used to be an audio podcast. I'm struggling. I don't know if I want to call this a podcast. I'd like to get your opinion technically, Alex, on this. Because to me, a podcast is audio and it has an RSS feed. What do you think about all these YouTubers calling their shows podcasts? What's your thought on that technically?
I think it's something we're going to have to move on from and say that's okay, because essentially we want to be where people are. And there's going to be an audience who don't use podcasting tools. They don't have a podcast player on their phones. They don't have it on the computer, but they do have other platforms. And if we are where our audience is, it's better than them asking us to come towards us.
So am I in the same place I was? Let's see, what would that be? 35 years ago, when I was angry that people were calling these little tiny thumbnail videos on my computer movies, QuickTime movies, because it's obviously not film. It's not a movie. Same thing.
I guess so. I mean, weirdly enough, I happened to be at the Apple Worldwide Developers Conference in 1991. And that's when they launched QuickTime. And if they didn't call it a movie, what would they have called it? 160 by 120, probably 15 frames a second is what they were showing, but they needed the movies to fit on floppy disks. Believe it or not, that's what they did. So what should these things be called if they're not movies? Videos?
It might be as simple as that. So maybe I will start calling this a podcast, but I'm just not comfortable with it yet.
Yeah.
So the whole purpose, as you know, from the old audio podcast days, is I've always just wanted a forum where we can talk about all things Final Cut, of course. But I think that what we're seeing now, especially in April of 2026, is that Apple is changing. Apple is fundamentally changed. Just yesterday, from Dylan, I actually caught the news from Dylan Bates. It was very funny. Dylan Bates posted this video. He's one of the Dylans, saying, "Hey, big news. What's his name? Tim Cook is stepping down." And now we're going to, I don't know that Dylan said John Ternus's name, but he said, Tim Cook is stepping down. And right away, I texted Brad Olson, friend of the show, and I said, "Oh my God, Brad, did you hear the news?" And he sends me a selfie, beep, beep, of him walking right next to Dylan Bates as they were walking through the show floor at NAB. And he goes, "Yes, I heard the news." So he was literally standing right outside of frame when Dylan made and posted that video. We've seen, there's questions I want to ask you, and I know where you're going to go, and I don't want to go there quite so hard yet. But we've seen a lot of changes in the last, say, let's call it 10 years since we did the audio podcast. What do you think the biggest changes have been at Apple in the last decade?
Well, the biggest changes of Apple, I suppose, is really embracing this services narrative. I mean, it's not really very obvious because obviously services is the kind of thing, it's related to subscriptions and people got subscription fatigue. But weirdly enough, they had hardware that came around every year. And when the MacBooks came out, when the phones came out, and essentially you'd have a blockbuster quarter followed by some less good quarters and stuff like that. But secretly, over the last few years, $100 billion business has been inside Apple, which is the services. So actually, weirdly enough, it's not glamorous and it's not cool now, but Apple is really into those services. And I think
by
that's good news
services,
for
we're
us.
talking about like iCloud or whatever they're calling it this week. Music. Are we calling music Apple Music a service?
Yes. So the service narrative is about recurring revenues and also things that are probably not things you buy once and the things that you keep on subscribing to. And so you do subscribe to services, but they're not subscriptions, they're services to that point of view. And what they do is they smooth over Apple's income. And the thing is, the more users they have, the more likely those users are going to get Apple services. And they aren't so like, that income is just smoothly going up and up and up. So essentially it's the hedge towards the future of Apple. Because it would have effectively wanted to be a pretty big US company or world company if it was just on its own, the various services. So movies and fitness, movies. I was thinking of what you said earlier, music and fitness and things like that.
Also like Apple TV and anything subscription, recurring revenue, monthly revenue, correct?
Yes. And funny enough, if you look at the Final Cut Pro manual that came out earlier this year in February, it says, or January, it says, Apple Creator Studio is a service mark of Apple, not a trademark, a service mark. So it's a service mark means that it's actually saying this thing, this trademark that we have is also a service mark. Apple is saying this is a service. So that's how they see it.
And I know you said $100 million, but in a $4 trillion company, is that big of a deal, do you think?
Well, no, 100 billion isn't bad. And I think
Apple chump change.
Exactly. But it's bigger than lots of corporations in America, for instance, and bigger than most corporations lots of corporations in Europe. And it's just one of the things that Apple does. I think it smooths things over quite a lot, and it'll only get bigger because as you get 1 billion, 1.5 billion, 2 billion Apple users, and also non-Apple hardware users, they still actually might use Apple services. So obviously, Apple TV is a bit of a fig leaf. It's a way of kind of hiding the fact they make most of their money from subscriptions from the App Store, which is a service as well, weirdly enough. So what happens is if you buy a subscription to Netflix on the App Store, then it's 30% of the initial charge in theory per annum for the first year, and then 15% of every single bit of subscription. And Apple includes that in its services revenue. So it's a big deal and very important to Apple. So I'm just really happy.
You're happy.
Apple has put Final Cut Pro inside a service, and services are important to Apple.
So what do you think? I don't think you and I have talked since the news of Final Cut subscription model, or what's it called? Apple Creative Studio, ACS?
Yes, Apple Creator Studio, yeah.
Creator Studio, yes. What's your thought on that?
I think they probably started working on this a long time ago, but they didn't really think things through, and I think they just launched because they had to just launch. And that's why we got a kind of weird thing where there's 2 copies of Final Cut Pro on your Mac if you actually get to a part of Apple's Creator Studio, and other Macs, other apps and things like that. So it's a bit confusing at the moment. So I think the first few months are about them actually ironing out the wrinkles of how this thing's actually going to work, because it doesn't quite work like any of these other bundles that you get from other people. So I think they're working out the model still. But I think it just has potential to be very important to Apple, which means, what we've had over the last 15, 16 years is the fact that Final Cut Pro and Motion and Compressor haven't been important to Apple. They've been important to us, but they haven't obviously been important to Apple, particularly as far as we can tell, judging by their actions. So I think this is really good that Pixelmator Pro, which is part of the bundle, part of the service, in a way is more important because it's directly going up against Photoshop. But Final Cut Pro actually at least has an image. People actually have heard of it. And lots of people are coming to, at least even old people who go to Facebook groups, are coming to Facebook groups like the Final Cut Pro groups and the Motion groups. And there's much more interest to find out what is this thing, because it's such a subscription of $120 a year. It's so little, and it's very interesting that essentially, I think it's really good.
And then, of course, right after they announced that, like a few weeks after, they announced the acquisition of Motion VFX. What does that mean?
It could mean all sorts of things. I mean, what I think it could be the basis of will be amazing. There's lots of things that could be really amazing. So we'll look. This is episode 1, volume 2, episode 1. So we're thinking in terms of the possibilities. Well, it will be amazing if every single one of the templates, because the things I always associate Motion VFX with all their templates. They're motion templates that work in Final Cut, and all their various designs, and there's hundreds of them. Now, most people kind of like the plugins and like the tracking stuff and like that kind of stuff, but I've never really thought of actually going to them for that. But over the last 20 years, since before Final Cut Pro 10, Motion VFX has been producing lots of really well-designed templates. I think it would be amazing if Apple created a new Apple Creator Studio app store, content store, and some of it will be seeded or started off by slowly releasing month by month content for Motion VFX that are just motion templates that work in Final Cut. And that would be a very powerful thing to say, come back, look how much has been coming in each month or regularly, which is really Motion VFX stuff.
But do you think, my theory is that what they're going to do is they're going to take the Motion VFX stuff. Everything has to get like Appleized, like we're not going to see that stuff any day now. They're going to fiddle with it for 6, 9, 12 months, and they're going to do something. I think they're going to take the Motion VFX stuff and make it the incentive for guys like me who don't want to subscribe to software to say, okay, fine, take my $13, because a note to Apple management, I would say, fine, take my $13 if I got all of that stuff. Now, if I only got a little of it, maybe had to pay, like, come on, you got $4 trillion. How much of my money do you really need? Just give me the Motion VFX stuff. I think it's almost a lost leader to push people over the edge to go to subscription.
Yes. I mean, I think that is a lot of really good content, and that is relatively straightforward. And you can tell that some of the content in Final Cut Pro for iPad, new since our last broadcast, was actually created by Motion VFX. You can recognize the style. So I think, and Motion VFX templates have been used in screenshots on the Apple website to say third-party content to come, including on the Final Cut Pro for iPad, and who knows, Final Cut Pro for Vision OS, who knows? And I think now, of course, quite a lot of people who haven't wanted to subscribe to Motion VFX's subscription service, they think this is good news because maybe they don't have to pay those same rates, and Apple are going to be providing, including all those, which are essentially better 3D object management, tracking, and other tools that they have, which are much more complicated tools or more advanced tools they've had. So Apple is also getting two groups of developers. They're getting the developers who actually did the advanced stuff and has a really good user interface. And they've also got a much larger lot of content, which was made by probably freelancers as well as full-time staff who are really good at using motion, are good at designing things. And they probably have staff because they got to where they are recently through venture capital. And the venture capital has paid off because Apple have bought them out. And I guess they made their investment in terms of improving things. So they got two groups of staff, 3 if you include the freelancers. So that's good news of more investment in content, depending on what Apple decide to do. And to some extent, I think that maybe if Apple had any idea what was going to happen recently in terms of competition to Motion, in terms of free tools now from Canva and from Boris FX, that's right, isn't it? In other words, those are After Effects competitors that are going to be free. So maybe Apple had some kind of hint of that, and maybe they thought, okay, well, let's forestall that a little bit because we're not ready to introduce Motion 10. Who knows?
So, based in just listening, to your posts and whatnot, and chatting, I know that you've been doing some design work for. I know you've been making Final Cut plugins for years, but you've also been doing stuff for people that are using After Effects. Is that correct?
Well, what it is that over the years, I've been using After Effects since 1997, so quite a while, 29 years.
Kosa days.
Pardon?
Kosa, when it was owned by Kosa.
Oh yeah, Kosa. Yeah. So it had just been bought by Adobe. So I think that was version 3 to 3.1 and 3.11. Absolutely. And there was the normal version, and there was the really expensive version. So the normal one cost $700, and the expensive one, production bundle, cost like $1,300. So I didn't get the $1,300 one. At least the company I was working at, I couldn't convince them to do that. But I was using After Effects, and in 2003, 2004, I made edited a video using After Effects. I thought, I've got 175 layers on this thing, and essentially it's just a staircase going right up, because every single clip was a layer in After Effects. I thought, I think it's time I learned editing, and then I got Final Cut Pro HD at the time, which is what it was called. So then I think that was
4.5, I think, was when they released HD.
So then I went over much more to video editing and things like that. And also eventually, as the years went by, I was still using After Effects for little title sequences to events, essentially. You got 3,000 people in a room, and you got screens all the way around, and you want all those screens to be connected together. Then you can use After Effects for that really well, and also motion. So I kind of used both. But these days, over the last 10 years, I've been making templates for the BBC mostly, and those templates have been for Final Cut Pro users, both for BBC News, BBC Weather, various TV shows, and stuff like that. And I get the brief in After Effects. So the broadcast designers send me this brief in After Effects. I open up the brief, which is an After Effects project, and I'm able to deconstruct it and get the response curves, get all the information I need out of it, and also to recreate it exactly, precisely in motion. So it used to be that nearly every single YouTube video, every single piece of social media from 2018 for 3 or 4 years that you see was made by the BBC, and this BBC all over the world was made using my templates for YouTube and for other platforms, including Instagram as well. So that was one of the things I did. But now, more recently, more of the BBC is asking for similar stuff, but for Premiere users. Mogets, which is the equivalent of motion templates. So I've been doing that a lot more recently. So considering you've been delving more and more into the Premiere After Effects world, and the long history that you and I have had about basically crapping on everything else, what is your thoughts on the state of the Adobe world today in 2026? In the case of Adobe, obviously everyone's out to get them. Now, it's a compliment that everyone's out to get them. It's a compliment that Boris FX and other people are out to get Adobe. So essentially, Adobe have established themselves as the people to emulate and to try and take over. So that's actually a compliment, but it's tough for them. I think they've got ancient code in their software. Some is probably 20 years old. They did say 20 years ago that, we're not going to give you such a big update to After Effects and Premiere because we're rewriting them completely. And given the fact we know it took 3 years at least for Apple to completely rewrite or recreate or create a new NLE for Final Cut Pro, and even then it wasn't ready, I think it's rather unlikely that After Effects was completely rewritten in 6 or 8 months, or Premiere. But it's essentially a marketing thing to explain why those things weren't really.
I think you can probably generate a version of the definition of rewrite it completely that might be in the neighborhood of truthful, but in terms of like starting from scratch, there's no way they did, for sure.
But the cool thing is that they've got a problem. Really, it's ancient code. Now, up until recently, it's not really been a problem. First, they were saved by the fact that PCs got faster and faster. 2000, 2005, 2010, they were going faster and faster. And then they could start implementing enough is in GPUs because of NVIDIA, because NVIDIA and Adobe had that kind of thing where they kind of attached themselves to each other, and they kind of marketed the idea of GPU stuff by saying, look, it's going to accelerate these things if we use, NVIDIA's code inside GPUs. And you may remember in 2007, 2008, there was lots of controversy about the kind of video cards that Apple had in their computers.
Absolutely.
Sometimes. But that's ancient history for most of the people listening. But just believe me.
If only we had taken all of our money and bought NVIDIA stock back then, we'd all be doing quite well.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, they were using Apple's playbook of integrated hardware and software, but their software was one that you couldn't buy, but it was software that other people could write graphics apps to run on. So to some extent, NVIDIA helped Adobe even though their code was really, really running more and more slowly because Intel hit a wall and their CPUs were getting slower and slower. But the big news, of course, over the last 5 years is Apple have Apple Silicon, which initially is very shocking and amazing and fantastic. But now with the MacBook Neo, the fact that it runs on 8 gigabytes of RAM is very interesting from the point of view of Adobe. Can they get any of their software to run well on an 8 gigabyte Neo?
I just want to get a Neo to see how much I can make it sweat. I think it would be a fun little project.
Well, I mean, in my first computer I had in 1980 at home, we actually put juice boxes in the fridge, and then we froze them, and then we put them on top of the ZX80, the Sinclair computer, and that helped it go not crash because it would actually keep it cool. And used with a juice box because I was young, and juice boxes were
cooled by juice box.
So yes, what was the point? Anyway, the Neo is very interesting because it will be, I think Adobe would like their stuff to run on the Neo because the future computer users, the people who are going to have bigger jobs, more technology in the future, many of them can only afford Neos. So essentially what we're doing is a slight rerun of 2003, 2004, in which the prevailing high-tech thing to edit on, of course, was Avid Media Composer. And then the scrappy little underdog was Final Cut Pro.
Right.
And it could run on your 12-inch Mac, Power MacBook. I can't remember what they called before. They were called PowerBooks. What was it called? Yeah, PowerBook, 12-inch PowerBook. They're a fantastic, lovely, beautiful machine that I had. But the crazy thing is that this app was hardly copy protected, which is kind of handy. And I don't think Apple were very serious about that. So the underground, the people who couldn't get access to tools, the people who didn't have money for the first 4 or 5 years of the 2000s, they had access to this software that wasn't well copy protected. It's probably like one serial number is shared between 80 people, I'm quite sure.
Yeah.
And it would run on pretty, secondhand Macs that people get access to.
Do you remember going on YouTube? And now this is later, so 2005 YouTube. You could go on YouTube and find people publishing serial numbers in the comments of their videos. Yeah, I think Apple, rightfully so, were just opening the door and letting anybody in, because once they decided they stole it, they'd like it. And I bet you a lot of those people became paid users.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting the point in which one grows up and decides to buy software. I must admit, there is some software that I used in the early years that maybe I didn't pay full price for. Let's just put it that way.
We all did.
But then it was like putting your big boy pants or your big girl pants on by actually paying for software. But I think Adobe is in the situation where they're the Avid of this world, and everybody else wants to be the Final Cut Pro because they're being disrupted from the low end. They're being disrupted from the low end because I think it'll be very hard for Adobe to rewrite their apps to run in 8 gigabytes sufficiently well, even on a very fast MacBook Neo. Whereas, not too hard for Blackmagic, Most of their code is from the last 15, 16 years, apart from a small part of it. The oldest part of Final Cut Pro is the motion that's in there, and motion is 20 years old. That is true. But the whole point of how Apple Silicon was invented and its integration was to make sure that motion and things that used even old GPU code from the 2004, 2003 would still run very smoothly. Of course it does. It's a real-time motion graphics app, making Final Cut Pro a real-time NLE. So Adobe have got this problem, I think, from the low end. So that's my position. The fact that Adobe's in a situation where people like the monoculture of After Effects, which means that Premiere is used quite a lot because every broadcast designer, every person doing lots of people doing VFX, the mainstream middle of post-production uses After Effects, and that means Adobe Premiere comes along with the ride, I would say.
I think the bundle of the Creative Suite or Creative Cloud or whatever it's called this week is probably its strongest thing. I know a lot of people stumble into not Resolve, but Premiere because of the other apps. Let's talk about Resolve. We've both glazed over it. What's your state of Resolve and Blackmagic? What do you think about that?
I mean, I think it is interesting that it is used to market their hardware, and they make most of their margin on their hardware. They are hinting they may have to start charging for Resolve. I mean, because I think they're probably...
Well, I mean, they do have anything over 4K you have to pay for. I had to pay for it. I had something come in once, and I think in the last year, and it was I think it was the Blackmagic codec. And Mr. Hawking, I know you have your BRAW decoder, encoder, whatever thing. I wasn't fully familiar with it, so I just got the paid version of Resolve. And just, do you know the trick about you throw your clips into a timeline and you say export every clip as a separate file? And so I just did that to a bunch of ProRes files and was on my merry way. But I know that Chris is scheduled to come on, and we'll talk about BRAW and all the other stuff. Somebody else was saying they were defending Resolve as like, you know, an actual alternative when it comes to like Hollywood. And I mean, I realize some people really love it. It's still track-based. It still bugs me. And I don't think at the highest levels, and I mean the highest, I don't think anybody's using it.
Well, it is interesting. There is a lot of on the Blackmagic website.
And I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for that comment. So go ahead, bring it on.
No, it's cool. I mean, the thing is that, of course, what they say on their website, they show all these movie posts. They show clips and say Resolve was used to make this movie. And we all know that 99.9% of it was on the grading of the movie and not necessarily the actual editing of the movie.
Exactly.
Also, even grading in London, which is where I'm based, is not even done in Resolve. It's really hardly used at all, because I'm a member of the Board of Governors of British Film Editors, which is the equivalent of ACE. And I know from nearly all the editors, we've got 800 or 900 kind of editors making TV. You have to prove that you've edited TV or movies. The Resolve is not the app that they use day to day.
What are they using?
I think, well, they're using Avi Media Composer still, and also in London,
for
it's
color?
No, Baselight.
Okay,
so they're using
Baselight
is the thing that's stopping, I would say, Resolve being taken seriously or being moved to, because it's like, and Baselight is like the After Effects of grading in London. In other words, nobody ever got fired for choosing Baselight. It's kind of like that. But I think that most editors sneakily know in the long run it'll be Resolve. They just don't know when. Right. So they're all kind of checking it out.
Do you think the Premiere users know that too?
I think they kind of do, but you can't. It's hard to admit that. It's a bit. I imagine if you were all in on Canon, but in the long run you're going to buy Nikon. You just don't really want to admit it to yourself, even if you know if it's actually kind of true. And I suppose that's true the other way around. Imagine if you were going, I'm a Nikon guy, Nikon gal, and I want to shoot movies on it, but you just know that Canon are ahead on that. You just know that Canon are kind of winning the movie race between those two kind of cameras. but now Nikon have bought red, which is very interesting. It makes that a little bit more interesting. But I think in their heart of hearts, lots of people know that essentially it's a track-based editor, Resolve, but it's all based on new code that was started relatively recently, which really helps.
I think we've talked about this. I think there are a lot of ex-Apple engineers that ended up going to Blackmagic. Do you know about any of that?
No, I am one of the least well-connected people when it comes to Apple. I think I'm famous enough that they know to keep away, especially after the previous Final Cut Grill when you said to me, "Oh, we know all about Alex," and I thought, okay, that's kind of good, but also kind of worrying.
So let's talk about this then. You brought up the topic. 4 years ago was the letter. Tell us about the letter.
Well, I was in a private Discord, a kind of Final Cut users of in movies and TV. And I was a member of it for a few years. I think Knut is one of the people, Knut Hayes is one of the people that started it off a couple of years, 5-6 years ago. I don't know quite when. But quite a lot of the case studies and quite a lot what we know about movies on Netflix and on German TV and TV shows and stuff like that is kind of shared there. And then that went public for people who were on that group. So that's how we all discovered about those things. And it turns out that I looked this up because in case you weren't asked, there was an editor called Marcos Castiel who said, maybe we should send a letter to Tim Cook about Final Cut Pro.
Right.
And I thought that was an amazing idea. So Knut made a separate little space on the Discord, and we all started discussing it. What should it say? What were the priorities on it? And then, so I wrote an initial letter, which I actually have right here. And then a couple of editors wrote their editor, and then I kind of mashed their letter, and I kind of mashed them together with mostly their letter. And then I kind of went about planning the campaign, working out how to find the editors, including through British Film Editors, which I was on the Board of Governors already, and other places as well. And then also I found a few journalists that I kind of primed 10 days in advance that we were going to do this. And as part of what we did in the Google form for the letter is we said, if you sign this, could you also give us a paragraph or something about Final Cut Pro? And also choose whether you would like to be contacted by journalists for further quotes. And we included all this in the organization so that when Scott Simmons and other people promoted the fact the letter was written, they found they could actually look as if they'd actually talked to the editors and got quotes from them because we had them already. And they were submitted like as a kind of media pack. So this is kind of my contribution to making the letter work. And then I put
Alex Gollner, Digital Rebel.
Funny things, I couldn't sign it because even though I'm a member of BFE, I'm no longer that kind of editor anymore. So I haven't used Final Cut, more recently in the last 10 years, I hadn't used Final Cut Pro to edit stuff. So I couldn't sign it, but I could certainly go to gopetition.com and put it on there. And we've got a few hundred people signing it to support it as well. And we got a good, strangely enough, we hadn't decided to do it around NAB. What an amazing coincidence that NAB had to be coming out there because we wanted people to be talking about it NAB if possible. So yeah, it was a letter that if you do a search for 100 TV and film editors write open letter to Tim Cook, you'll find it on the Go Petition site and also various Apple websites, promotional websites.
And there was a response sometime later, correct?
Yes, exactly 1 month later. The response came on fcp.co. The main kind of hub of Final Cut Pro information at the time. And there wasn't a person named or a person quoted or who said it, but this was official via Pete Wiggins about the response to the points that were in the letter. I actually put in the letter, let's talk about the certification in the letter so Apple have something to say they can reply to in order to, so they can promote the certification.
Right. So
that was part of the design of the letter to make it not just a load of complaining, but a kind of, to make it replyable to. But we never thought, I think they'd actually reply publicly, but they did. So that was amazing. So they said that they appreciate what was said. They said there's Final Cut Pro certification available from FMC. And also they said they would start a industry work group in which various editors would be chosen to have regular meetings in which they give feedback about the state of Final Cut Pro.
I'd like to hear
things like that.
I'd like to hear the outcome of even one of those meetings. I don't know that that's ever happened.
Well, the interesting thing is that there was some kind of output of that in this private Discord, in which members of this committee, or whatever you call it, panel, industry panel, they said, "Oh, well, I'd like to say what happened in the panel. We can't say who was there, but they said it's okay to share it here." And the here was on this Discord for people who also, So there was a kind of, they didn't talk about beta software or, I don't know. I think, I didn't want people to kind of reveal anything they didn't feel comfortable and weren't allowed to reveal. So it's more about, did you feel positive after the meeting? It was a real surprise when even people started talking about what happened at the most recent meeting. I'm going, well, obviously Apple allowed this to be discussed in this group. And I thought that was shocking. But
so this is one of my biggest beefs right now. And I've seen really great people leave the Final Cut team. I've seen really great people, slip into obscure, side hallways doing other projects. And I think that I firmly believe, and I've talked about this on episode 1, which you haven't seen yet because I haven't recorded it, but I'm going to later today, that this secrecy and clamping down of the voices of the creators of these tools is massively detrimental to the company. Massively. And I'm not naive. I get that it's a multi-trillion-dollar company. And I get that an employee saying something wrong can cost piles of money. Sorry about the microphone. Piles of money. But ultimately, I don't care. And I think that it was, and this is going to take us to the next topic that I want to talk about. I don't know that Tim Cook was the best CEO that they could have chosen. I do think he made a huge company. I think there's, I read it, Apple went from $350 billion valuation to $4 trillion valuation under Tim Cook. And I think if you're an employee and you have stock options or a shareholder, I own Apple stock, I would imagine you do too, it's good, but we've lost that. Here, I'm going to show you. I think I have a button I can show you this. We've lost that pirate spirit. This is what made Macintosh what it was. And, if you don't know the pirate story, you should. But they've lost that. And that bothers me. And I think that it has hampered Final Cut's development and acceptance. It has caused them to lose valuable talent when it comes to development. And it's stifled their ability to defend what they're doing and explain it. And that's the part that drives me just bonkers, just crazy. And what I'm really hoping, next topic, going forward, you heard the news about, and we mentioned it earlier, Mr. Cook is leaving. Okay, a lot of people have said that Tim Cook has already had one foot out the door. I mean, you can see all of the footage of him like on the dais with Donald Trump when he was being inaugurated, and people are like, what's going on here? And apparently, what he wants to do is he wants to move into interfacing with various governments and agencies and become chairman of the board or executive chairman of the board. And with that, they're bringing on this guy who we all know as the tiniest man to ever work at Apple. It's John Ternus way back there. And he does have pictures where he's been witnessed to be a little larger. Ternus is interesting. He's 50 years old, but the most important thing, quite a bit younger than Cook, but he comes from engineering. Tim Cook was in charge of manufacturing and probably procurement. And, he changed Apple's DNA from being a company of, factories and warehouses to contracting deliverables just in time, and probably saved the company, billions of dollars. But Ternus is an engineer, and that really intrigues me. When the guy with his hand on the wheel comes from an engineering background, which is much more interesting to me. I don't know. Do you know anything about John Ternus?
Not really. I mean, the thing is that he's only been at Apple for 25 years, which is a long time, but not very long compared to the other Apple folk. But he's young enough for it to be okay, but old enough to be taken seriously. But what they say is, and what the prime leaker, I can't remember his name, Gurman, says, is that the fact that he's very good at making decisions. Whether even if they're right or wrong, their decision is made. Whereas Tim Cook has always been a consensus kind of guy. And I think to some extent, the last 15 years of Final Cut Pro, since Final Cut Pro 10 came out, is essentially the wrong people have had the ear of the wrong people in terms of making the decisions.
Clearly.
Who knows if Susan or who was running was in the org group is the right person for Pro Apps to be part of. I think she was at a summit once. And it's a matter of the politics of the various people involved trying to get on the board, all that kind of stuff. But I think there is an opportunity for a culture change. And the culture change of, the point of integration, the point in which people access AI or all the software of the future these days is the hardware, and Apple make the best hardware. So the fact that the guy makes hardware and that's Apple's integration of hardware and software is what it does, what they do the best, is good news, because we hope that Apple Creator Studio becomes more important to Apple. And I think it should, because if Apple's corporate definition includes at the end of the definition is helping people all over the world leave the world, helping the Apple staff want to leave the world a better place or make the world a better place. I think supporting creativity and a creator studio is a direct example of people having given access to tools so they can tell stories, and stories can change the world. Now, those stories may be, I just need a safe crossing for my kids outside my school, to I'm going to save millions of people by whatever your campaign happens to be. In other words, your influence, your storytelling through creativity. This seems very Apple-y to me, because I don't really get a philosophy from what Adobe are doing or what even Avid are doing or Blackmagic. They just go, we just make the stuff that people make, but we make it better than them. Whereas at least at Apple, there's a kind of, underneath it all, in theory, the reason why they're doing it is to make the world better. And it's not just for the 0.1% of people who get to make movies and TV. It is for maybe a large number of people to make the world a better place.
I think you hit the nail on the head there when you said, in theory. And I think that when push comes to shove, Apple employees, they love their jobs. I think or at least they loved their job. I think that they realize that being an Apple employee is a cash cow, and you will probably be able to retire quite well if you stick it out for those 20, 25 years. And people just don't want to rock the boat. I think that they start with an emotional buy-in, and that emotional buy-in gets them into the machine. I'm here to tell you, I think a lot of them find out that emotional buy-in wasn't enough. It's not enough. And, when I think about employees, you retain them with money, you retain them with appreciation, and you retain them with respect. And if one or two of those things go away, you're going to lose those employees. And with that, I would say, why is it that we've seen some great people with decades at the company leave? One of those three things is not there. They're either not being respected, they're not being, what did I say? Listened to. I did that so much better earlier. Or the money's not there. I think the money's there. I think it's the other two that are the problem.
Well, the funny thing is that I think Apple are quite well known to not to pay as much for the same job. So their own brand and what they are proposing to do and their point of existence is in theory part of their employer brand, which is different from their brand. It's a thing that gets people to, obviously the sexiness and the coolness makes people want to work from Apple. They like the idea of how normal people will actually react to that. Because if you say, I'm working for SAS or I'm working for Microsoft, you get more social points apart from in Redmond to say you're working for Apple. So I think that is part of it. But the danger has been, I think, and maybe this is Tim Cook not being careful about it or the HR people not being careful, is that I think the evidence of what we've been getting for the last 10 years is that Apple have been hiring yes people.
Yes.
So they say they want someone to challenge them. They hire people to challenge them to make them uncomfortable. That's what they say about their employer brand. But in practice, what we've been seeing, as far as I can tell, as I said, I'm the least well-connected person, all I can look at is the results of what Apple are doing, is the fact that I think the hierarchy and also even, who knows, maybe people inside Pro Apps, there's essentially the people have been hired not because they've been hired because they're less challenging than the previous person.
Yeah.
And it's safe and you feel much more comfortable to hire someone like yourself. But the danger is then it's a bit like the randomness and the scariness actually lead to less good stuff or less. It's not that it's not good. It's the fact that the potential is just not being made the most of. And
right.
The funny thing is, it's not even the potential of Apple. I think the reason why Adobe software and Blackmagic software and Avid software is stuck in 2010, 2011. In other words, it's the same vision everyone had in 2005 of sticking to having rooms and then connecting them together and having different things, is the fact that Apple didn't win the argument and they didn't put the effort in to actually inspire the others anymore. People aren't, it's not like Resolve, we're really competing with Final Cut, or Motion is like, After Effects is like, there's some things that Motion can do that After Effects still can't do when making templates for Premiere. But obviously they just got that list in 2011 and they just aren't able to do it. But in practice, shouldn't Apple software inspire competition? Oh, damn, they're sorry for swearing. They've implemented this. That's real trouble. But now, of course, at the moment, Apple so far recently has been about table stakes features. In other words, we have to put these things out because that's table stakes for NLEs at the moment, like transcripts or dupe detection, those kind of things.
Dupe detection.
Yeah, and that was 4 years ago. That's when dupe detection actually came, duplicate ranges, as it's called in Final Cut. But when was there something that really got Apple's competition in the world of Pro Apps to really sit up and take notice?
Yeah.
And isn't that a good thing? But so sadly, everyone is losing by Apple not competing properly, including all the people that they would normally be inspiring.
And let's also say this, and we're going to wrap up here. And if you're willing, I'd love to have you come back and, we'll pick another topic and tear it apart and make a mess of it. But I think it needs to be said that you and I and many others absolutely love cutting in Final Cut Pro. I will tell you this, it is the last edit system that I will work on in my career. That being said, I may not be around for a whole lot longer, but it is the last editor that I will work on. And I want other people to understand why that is. And that's why we're here. So I don't have any fancy outro or any way of getting out of this show. But Alex, thank you so much for doing this. I knew I could count on you. You're as much of a media hog as I am. So I was like, hey, you want to be on camera? Yeah, sure, I'll do that. Who, me? And I knew you'd have your red shirt on. So thanks for that. And we'll do this again. This is not going to be a fancy YouTube channel. I'm not going to ask you to like and subscribe, although you probably should. There will be plenty of these. But this is not a polished YouTube channel. This isn't, I'm not a YouTuber. We're just telling a story here, and it's going to take many episodes to tell the whole story. And but I thank you for listening. So, Alex, anything you want to say goodbye?
Just goodbye, and I look forward to being with you and the audience soon, all being well.
Yeah. All right, Alex. Thanks a lot, and we'll be back for another episode probably next week. Take care.
Bye.
And hold on, let me hit the stop over here. Oh, I got to use this mouse. Boop, doop, boop, boop. Goodbye.